Hi, this is Society member Doug Sperling, and I'm going to take about a half hour to discuss um, Google Earth and how you can use that tool to look at and understand a little bit historic map imagery. Um, there, in particular, in this case, historic map imagery related to Virginia and Truckee. I think the quickest way to get into this is just to dive in. And take a tour instead of having a lot of discussion, which is less exciting. Some tech tips and whatever and interpretation tips will come up as we go. What we have here is um, images of the 1916 valuation maps for the entire line. I georeference them manually by looking at things that are in the satellite image, and in some cases in the DEM. That's the digital elevation model, the 3D model that's contained in Google Earth that you get for free from them, and comparing it to different kinds of information that are on the map. And those kinds of information that are on the map are really um, physical traces of rights of way and property boundaries, and there's a bunch of ways to find those, but it involves reading and evaluating and weighing different classes and kinds of evidence against each other to get a total to get a total picture of the situation that allows you to place this map correctly, and then you can use the map to refine and finalize and draw this image. Now you can see I've got some editing still to do here, but anyway, that's what we're looking at. That's what this is. Let's turn off, to get started on our tour, I'm going to turn off one of these valuation maps so we can see, okay, that's what we're talking about. This is a mainline map. There are also station maps. They're at a finer scale, so they cover they cover about 1/16 the area. The same size sheet of paper, but because the scale is different, it covers about 1/16 the area. And so you can see this map was filed with the ICC in 1916. Okay, so our tour is going to start in Reno, and then at milepost 0 and head southward over the line. I'm going to turn that map back on and then fade these away, because in this area we're near a station, so we had station maps, and these are much finer and show much more detail, finer scale, and show more detail, so they're handy where they exist. And they only exist in some areas. Let's back out. You know, you can see Virginia City had a lot of coverage, Carson City. Other than that, Minden had coverage. Other than that, that's all the station maps. Gold Hill, Mound House had one. Okay, so just to set the scene, right now as we start out on Virginia and Truckee, we're looking east. There's Salt Lake, you know, there's Wyoming. And I'm gonna bring down the fade, and you can see there's the depot and the initial point of the railroad. That's milepost 0.0. And for the engineering station, that's 00 plus 00, 0.0. However, in 1906 or thereabouts, they sold, Virginia and Truckee sold a piece of railroad to Southern Pacific, Central Pacific, and they used it for a siding, I believe, or something. So after that time, the railroad began here. However, this is important. They did not restation the railroad or recalculate the mileage posts. So 0 is still here. It's just on somebody else's property after that date. And you can see a few interesting things. There was significant V&T infrastructure in the downtown area north of the river, and you can see the relationship between the now, which is April 2015 in this case. There's a ballpark and a bunch of other stuff, and in 1916 the situation was really quite different. The Truckee River bridges. I've got some historic images here. Let's take a look quick. So there is an image of the V&T's Truckee Bridge, and we can see the flour mill in the background. Here's the river, and it's clear that we are up above the river on some kind of something. So from that information, I take it that we were standing probably on the Rock Street Bridge, which in 2015 doesn't exist anymore. Let's look at that. No more bridge. Looking this way. One of the pieces of information, there's the flour mill again. We're obviously in a different position. We're looking at a different angle, and there's V&T's bridge again. One of the pieces of information that Google Earth can encode about a historic image like that is information about where the photographer was standing, and if you double click, information about the angle in three-dimensional space that the photographer was looking. So there's the flour mill yet again. So we can see from the accumulation of all these photos that it's over here, the flour mill. And again, we can see the relationship between current day stuff. There's a lot here now with some kind of intended development that has, a decade has gone by, and I haven't seen this get completed, I think, at this point. Let's look. I think if you drive by there, they're still right. It's still in this state. 2016. There we are, April 2015. Let's talk briefly about Holcomb Street and some of the things we can learn from the valuation map about this situation that'll tell us a little bit about where the rails were, so that when you're standing, it's Holcomb Avenue. When you're standing in Holcomb, you can sort of understand the relationship between the stuff that was there and the stuff that's there now. So I geo-referenced this sheet in this case by looking carefully at the relationships between public property, so you can see the property boundaries quite clearly because of the way they've affected the arrangement of objects that are visible in the image. Fences, sidewalks, things like that. Property boundary in this jurisdiction, in this kind of space, is actually going to be right there at the back of the sidewalk. So that's the division between public property and some private parcel over here. And the interesting thing here is that V&T was operating not in the street like, say, Southern Pacific in Alameda in Los Angeles, or New York Central up the middle of Washington Street in Syracuse. Instead, they were not in the street. They were on a strip of private property immediately adjacent to the street, and when the railroad was was abandoned, this strip of private property reverted or was taken by other parties, and much of it became the street, and it looks like some of it, it's actually likely that this may also be, well, no, this part probably went to landowners. In any case, and again, photographs can give us a good understanding of the situation, and this map, if we read the photo against the map, you get a pretty good understanding of the way the situation changed, and so you can understand what you're looking at now and where the old stuff was, which is one of the goals here. So you can see two tracks. You can see this track must be the siding because it disappears right there, and you can see there's a fence, a stone fence, a real nice one. That's probably the property boundary, and a telegraph line. What does the valuation map tell us about that? Here you go. There's our siding, so we're certainly looking this way. Unless, of course, the photo is mirrored, which is not impossible. And you can see there was a fence along here, and Holcomb Avenue at that time was not doesn't appear to be well developed. It appears kind of like grassy, dirt, whatever. And this is 1906. So, you know, 113 years ago, Holcomb Avenue was a lot different than it is now. Okay, and let's turn back on the main right-of-way and track maps. I'm going to knock the opacity control back a little bit, and we're going to head south. Here's an interesting situation. Anderson's, I believe this image was probably taken at Anderson's, and I believe it was probably shot, whoops, it won't perform for me. Okay, sometimes it does that. I believe it was probably shot this way. Reason for that is because we see a switch stand, but the other track is not in view, so we must be looking, since this is the only track around that's really possible, we must be standing about here looking about this way, and so you should be able to see Peavine, and probably you do, almost certainly you do. So it tells you the street's over here a ways. There's a lot of information in that photo, actually. In fact, from this spot, the old street, which we believe, you know, which I believe was over typically on this side, the west side, I mean, that's 200 feet, so it's pretty far. So we get all that from analyzing these maps. Let's blast through this area and look at Brown School quickly. And that is right about here. No, sorry, that's not right about there. There's a very interesting image. That's it. There's a very interesting image here that helps us greatly placing this map correctly, so that we can understand the relationship between the historic road, the historic V&T right-of-way, and the current road. So here's the image, and we have information. There's Brown School. That building in 1950, that building is still there. So here it is, and you can analyze this image to roughly understand about how far it was from the edge of that building to the rails. And it's important to understand when you're looking at this image that the rails through here are tangent. So that's a crucial piece of information. The building standing is a critical piece of information, and that tells us that it was maybe 85 feet over from the edge of the building. And that is information I was able to use to help place the map, which in turn, so the images and the map, like one of the key things to take away from this is that the images and the valuation maps inform each other if you're careful about what you're seeing. Okay, it's 3:43 p.m. So let's get down to Carson City. Well, let's stop at tunnel number 1. So the valuation map, which was made in 1916, is telling us that there is a tunnel here. Let's fade first the maps out of view, and then my work out of view, so we can see the raw situation as the satellite is telling us. It's there. So we have information that tells us that there is a tunnel number 1 here, and I think you can see that there is an engineered right-of-way here. And in fact, this tunnel caved in the years after this valuation map was produced, and they just bypassed the tunnel. Instead of repairing the tunnel, they just built a new fairly sharp curve around here. I think by sharp, I think I'm talking about 18 degrees or something, which on a standard gauge is a pretty good curve. So that's a situation where, interpretation of the situation on the ground versus the map is not entirely transparent until you have that information. The information that something happened later that explains what we're seeing. Okay, Carson City. This needs to be the subject of a future discussion or presentation. In any case, here let's turn my drawn information back on. I drew this from the valuation maps. The station maps really have a lot of detail and a lot of precision. Let's back off the fade, and you can see what I mean. If you look carefully at the relationship between the property boundaries in the map and the streets, that's what allowed me to place the image here, and from that draw the Virginia and Truckee objects, such as, for example, their valuation office where that mapping work was done, next door to their passenger depot, which used to have a wooden platform. All of this I know from the valuation map, which I was able to place by looking at the relationships right there. That is a property line. Okay. Moving toward, I think there's some interesting things to discuss near Mound House. There's a couple of things that ought to get talked about. Oh yeah, we have to bring these back. That's too much brightness. A couple of things that are important to understand here. So the railroad originally, when it was built, had a relationship to the land that was like this, an alignment. And when they rebuilt the railroad, they deviated right about here, and there approximately is the existing line. There you go. And you can see about here it cuts back in. I think now I need to change to the next image. Yes. To get good agreement. So what that means is that this is an abandoned trace, and then you can see the reason very clearly. You can see the reason they rebuilt over here, because the property situation in this entire area is very complex, and because of subsequent development after the abandonment. So to rebuild the line exactly would be perhaps possible, but also prohibitive, expensive. So they didn't. This is interesting. Last fall, of course, we had a very excellent presentation about the Silver City line. It's entirely visible. There it is. The Silver City branch. You can see very clearly the cut and fill. One thing I want to point out to people is that this is the Google Earth environment uses WGS84. It's a world coordinate system that is now a global standard, and that means that you can export this stuff to handheld devices, and that's potentially useful. Because you can take, say, these lines and have them appear in a handheld device, like a little navigator with a screen or something, and you can actually, you can use that to walk you right to this stuff that's otherwise challenging to find, perhaps, in this terrain without a compass and some way to understand distance. Anyway, moving up toward Gold Hill. I've been talking about 20 minutes, so we're going to talk about Gold Hill for some minutes, and then a couple of other things really quick, and we'll wrap this up. So I'm going to bring back the valuation maps, and in this area, again, we have station maps, and we have because there were important stations here, we have station maps and we have regular right-of-way and track maps. So I'm going to fade the right-of-way and track maps out of existence, and we'll look at the finer resolution station maps. We have, by the way, a similar situation here. The valuation map is telling us that there used to be a tunnel here. I think everyone in this room knows this. But when they reconstructed the line, they did not repair that tunnel. Instead, they built a bypass. And this is, again, quite a sharp curve. This, I believe, is about an 18-degree and 40-some minute curve. So that's a very sharp curve for a standard gauge main line. And, you know, you can see this one's a little bit less, but this one, the one they have now, is in neighborhood of that sharpness. Okay. Couple of things here. So I have a lot of images of Gold Hill, and we're gonna sort of take a look at these quick and keep a couple of things in mind. Again, through here there's been subsequent development, in particular the Overman pit that's very well known, and various other kinds of development that caused the reconstructed railroad to be built in a different place from the original alignment. The gulch, obviously, at Crown Point is now completely filled in. If you look on old topo maps, we will if we have time. This was a gulch. There was, of course, a famous trestle here. That's all long gone and filled with mine tailings. So interpreting the landscape that you can see can be challenging, but you know, you have to pay attention and keep everything in mind. My take on the situation with this photo, remember I georeferenced these manually, is that we were about here. We've got tangent track, which there isn't much of on this part of the VNT, and we've got two parallel tracks in the image, and we are looking toward the very distinctive tailings piles. And bear in mind, there's the very distinctive structure sort of behind the school. So my take on all of this information together, plus the fact that there is a cut in the railroad through a bank right about there, which is not evident anymore, but on old topo maps it was. On old topo maps you can see that cut in the topo. So I placed that photo here for that reason. Let's look at that structure from the other direction. This is the school. Its location is very well known, but let's actually talk quickly about one of the ways it can be well known. I've got some georeferenced Sanborn maps here. Here's Virginia City, and again these maps are from various sources, but they're all public domain. So I'll release this information, and everybody will have this. It should probably be refined a little before I do that, so it'll be soon, but maybe not yet. Oh, wrong one. Here's how you do this. Turn on the key map, and it looks like we want page 11 and 12. So we want plate 12, and plate 11. Okay, and then these need a little fade so we can see what's going on. So there's the Crown Point. I just want to point out, by the way, the navigational properties of Sanborn maps are often not great, not excellent. You could deal with that a bunch of ways. I don't think we have time to really talk about that, but software exists that will allow you to differentially warp these images if you have known points that you trust that will let you do that. There's the public school, and you notice there's a stone terrace in front of it. So let's look at one of our images of the school again. There's the very well-known stone terrace that's actually still there. The school is of course gone, and there's that. So we now have a relationship between this picture and the Sanborn map, and that helps us over here with this picture, which in turn we know about these rails very specifically, even though there's no trace of them now really necessarily. I mean, there is possibly a trace or not, depending on how you interpret this, which looks like a bunch of newly moved rocks to me. This looks to me like a drainage feature or something. Anyway, all of this establishes, by reading the map, we know something about where the railroad was with a fair amount of precision, and then by reading these images and the Sanborn against each other, we're starting to build a model of the situation, even though really not much of that, there are few traces of that are actually left in the landscape, because the entire topography is altered or gone. The buildings are gone, the railroad's in a different place or gone entirely. So these are techniques to use the various data sources against each other and get somewhere. And then do it in a form that where you can right click and save as, and then have that, so you don't have to do it twice or over and over. Let's get up here now. It's 3:56. I've been talking for 26 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap this up. We'll look at some of these photos quickly. I'm going to double click and we'll sort of understand what the photo can tell us about the landscape and the Sanborn, and maybe bring back the valuation map and see how all these data sources relate to each other. Let's get rid of the Sanborn. And by the way, I just want to point out, this station map is a little unusual compared to all the others I've looked at, and I've looked at an awful lot of them at this point. They've got a little inset down here with the actual tracks and structures, and I georeferenced the map that really just shows property relationships. I think the situation up here was so confused that at this scale somebody must have decided that showing it all on top of each other would be hard to read, given that we only have one print color, black against white. So few more images. If you go in Street View, you know that one of the most marvelous architectural features of Gold Hill was the mining hall, and it's not there anymore. It's entirely gone. It is, whoops, there's that bug again. It is entirely evident, however, where it was. Here we are looking northward up the steep hill at it. There's the mining hall right there, and there's the tracks. So we're standing here. The mining hall then is about here. Whoops, that's not the mining hall, but okay, you can see that the photographer was standing about here looking at the depot. This one's the mining hall. And so you can see we're standing along the track, just south of the track. And let's move here. This is one of my favorite images ever made. The richness of this semi-urban environment is just beyond imagining almost. One thing you can do to transfer information, let's get rid of the let's get rid of those valuation sheets. You can make a you can transfer information by tracing it making either a polyline or a or in this case a polygon tool. So I could have, I didn't, I just freehand drew this, but I could have traced this out of some other map, a property map or something, and then I would have an object in Google Earth. Now you can also turn this into a 3D object, and this actually can be useful for understanding view sheds of photographs. And that is not supposed to be doing that. Okay. There. Okay. If I make this, whoops, you got to go in here and click the extend sides to ground thing. And now you've got a 3D model. Now I don't have any information about the height of this, so I just said, well, let's call it 5 meters or something. But if you have information about the height and the position of this object, that can help you a lot in sorting out, you know, what you're actually looking at. Whoops, wrong one. You know, you can replicate that view even though the thing is gone. Anyway, and that's an analytical technique you use a lot. You can actually, I've permitted probably 200 cell phone tower emplacements over the years. We use this a lot to calculate, to just rapidly calculate view sheds. That's an area of big concern to planning commissions. Okay, so we talked about Gold Hill. It's now 4:01. I have perhaps 5 minutes left. I think this sort of wraps up our quick tour of the railroad with a special emphasis on Gold Hill. And I want to take a couple of minutes to talk quickly about other kinds of map resources that we didn't look at all. So I've got a file that I prepared. I just want to make you aware that these other things, other kinds of things exist. And that you can use them in this database, and you can look at the Virginia and Truckee against these other sorts of resources. So let's give this some fade. Well, it's not yet. This is the GLO township plat for Township 15 North, Range 20 East. And we right now, as we sit in the gold dust, we're about here in Section 9, in the southeast quarter, I believe. No, we're actually, there we are. No, we're actually in the southwest quarter. So this is the hand-drawn survey plat. I got this from the BLM, but this is the General Land Office survey plat, and you can see from 1862. And I georeferenced this to the section lines using that tool I showed you. I did it this way, and you can see that you get over here, and even at this scale, these are quite, the information contained in this about both property features and physical features is actually quite remarkable for its quality. There's the river. Now this is of course pre-Virginia and Truckee. I want to show you very rapidly that other kinds of valuation sheets, the valuation project continued until the 1960s. And the later valuation sheets, here we are in Santa Monica, California. The later valuation sheets had different types of information, much more information, especially as quality plotters and printers became available. They could show more stuff, and this has property, boundary, and curve and bearing information that is very useful. I have this sheet because it shows the original and adjusted rights of way of Los Angeles and Independence. There's John P. Jones, who made all his money up in Virginia City. He was the owner of Los Angeles and Independence. National Geographic. I want to make you aware of this resource. National Geographic some years ago scanned the entire USGS maps and then georeferenced them. And I've got a tool right here. I just turned it on, but it's not working great because Windows just updated. That's a long story. Anyway, this so you can get the entire USGS topo maps delivered, streamed, I guess, into Google Earth, and it just streams the area that you're looking at. But it's basically this product, these images that I just turned on. I just turned on, you know, here we go, that image right there. It's basically this product, but for the whole United States. Streamed, however, so it's not on your computer. It's arriving as you look, and it's got hill shading applied digitally. That's this fake shadow right here that helps you. It helps many people understand the landscape better. Here is a Department of Public Works map. And this is another type of resource. I didn't use it for this project, but this is another type of resource that can say a lot about property relationships, that, in a way that can tell you something about Google. Sorry, not Google Earth. About Virginia and Truckee. What are we looking at? This is from San Mateo, California, Department of Public Works, and it shows the old right-of-way of Ocean Shore Railroad. This area right here, after Ocean Shore was abandoned in 1920, this became the highway, and then there was an earthquake in 1958, and all this land is now gone. It fell into the ocean. This spot right here is actually where the San Andreas Fault enters the ocean, leaves the continent and enters the ocean. So all this fell away, and you know about the position of this stuff with accuracy because Department of Public Works produced a map that shows those properties. So that's an instance of how you can use other resources that you would think maybe don't have anything to do with railroads. Here's a historic map that I think is well known to you guys. And this is from before Virginia and Truckee existed. This is, well, this is a map of all the railroads. Here, let's turn that thing off. But in particular, this shows of particular interest to us. This shows the San Francisco and Washoe that was projected to Virginia City from Placerville, in fact. Right there was the beginning of the line. You can actually do engineering analysis on this. I don't have time to actually show you that, but this would have been a very... I've traced this line and then refined it a little bit to the topography, and this would have been a very high quality line had it been built in terms of its engineering standards. Last thing I want to show you, and then we'll wrap this up. So I'm at 4:08, so I have taken 3 minutes longer than I had planned. So other resources, these are property maps from the NDOT library. I'm going to apply some fade to this, and I think turn off the first one. Too much fade. And you can see a little bit about the subsequent history of some of Virginia and Truckee's property. This tells you a little bit about the way that it turned into other stuff, in this case the highway. How did I georeference this with any kind of accuracy? Well, we have information. Two kinds of information that let me do that. The first kind of information is they mapped the old spur that at this point was gone at the date of this map. And then they also tell us where a section line is. There's the north line of the southeast corner of section 25. And I know that information from various other sources, such as this. so there's a section line, and then it's a simple matter to measure over a quarter mile, which is 1320 feet from there, and then place the map. So anyway, and it's a little rough, but it gives you it's certainly enough to get to like a tier 1 situation in like a land development a land development process of the sorts that I've been involved in. So you can possibly take information developed this way to preliminary financing agreements. So it's it's quality enough to do real work, and they do real work. Here's images. These are obviously, let's just turn on one. These are screenshots from a real live project, the Humboldt to Hama Railroad. And this information was developed in Google Earth. And there's their profile and the line they drew. Anyway, so what that tells you is that this information is accurate enough to be meaningful, and to begin to give us a quality model that will help us understand relationships of various kinds of data to each other, and then start to understand the relationship of long gone things to things that are there now. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for their time, and I've got a few minutes for questions. Thanks.